And I think that's about it. And I see Matt is ready to get going.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Kruger. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Land and Water, and I am happy to be having the opportunity to join you this afternoon. I know yesterday you heard from some of our conservation partners, and I hope that your discussions were enlightening and informative and engaging. My role today is to share with you some information, albeit very briefly, about Wisconsin's conservation history that you are now a part of and kind of your place in it, to talk a little bit about some of the roles and responsibilities of Land Conservation Department staff, as well as LCCs, Land Conservation Committees, and to provide a snapshot, kind of an introduction to Wisconsin Land and Water as your statewide association. And my hope is that by the end of my talk, I will have provided you some information that that allows you to feel as though you are part of a conservation family and a conservation force that right now is a necessary and noble cause, more so than many other times in our history, I would say. And especially in Wisconsin, we have such a rich history of it. I think it's a wonderful tradition to have everybody be a part of. So I'm gonna just jump on in. If this slide advances, there we go. Okay, as I mentioned, the things I want to talk about: Wisconsin conservation history, roles and responsibilities of LCDs, intro to Wisconsin Land and Water. But I first want to begin with starting with why. Before I talk about the what of conservation, I think the why of our conservation and the why of what we do, why we do it is really important. I think it's no secret that anybody who is joining this call is not in their current position for the paycheck. I would suggest or surmise that anybody who's in this line of work does it for some sort of a personal conviction or core belief or values. And those are things that drive us to careers like conservation. And I think it's this book, Start With Why by Simon Sinek, the very premise of the whole book is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, which is a really interesting thing to think about when you work in a job where your work matches your convictions and your passion so much. So as I've been in my position at Wisconsin Land and Water for the last 2 years, I've really thought a lot about what my own personal why is. And really, I think when it comes down to it, working to support and enhancing locally led conservation is the single most effective way to get conservation on the landscape, period. And I firmly believe that. And that's why I do the work that I do. So I guess I just wanted to encourage folks to think about your own why as you go through your work. Even in the most mundane of times, in the most challenging of times, especially the most challenging times, it's really important to have that to access when you need it and to share that with people, because people respond to that conviction and that belief, and they have a better understanding of who you are and why you do the work you do. So there's my plug for Starting With Why, and this is a great read. It's very interesting. So zooming in on Wisconsin conservation history, there's a long history of conservation and people having a relationship with the land beyond what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to sort of conveniently look at a period of about the 1840s to the 1860s, where there was several waves of immigration from Northern European countries, where people settled in the Midwest here and settled in Wisconsin. And in the process of doing so, immigrants who came here found a landscape that looked very similar to the landscape they knew. And I can personally attest to this, having gone over and toured around Bavaria several years ago in Germany, saying, oh yeah, this looks a lot like Wisconsin. So, that works both ways. So they came here, they saw a landscape that they understood how to read it, they understood how to farm it, and they were good farmers. And they found that the soil was fertile, it grew crops well, and more immigration happened as more family members came over and joined. And they implemented many of the same traditional practices that had been done over in Europe, where woodlots and steep hill slopes were grazed, pasture was converted to row crops, wetlands were drained. Really, what ended up happening is soil was left bare for long periods of time. And though there were similarities to the landscape between Northern Europe and Wisconsin, a fundamental difference was our weather and our precipitation, and particularly the fact that we get these intense rain events that aren't typical in Europe or hadn't been typical. And as everybody around here knows, and as I know from the gully washer that came through Madison last night, we get big rainstorms, and they dump a lot of rain and they can move a lot of soil. And when that soil is left uncovered, erosion is the result. And in 80 to 100 years post-settlement, we were seeing serious erosion problems like we hadn't seen before, where topsoil was moving from uplands down to lowlands. And so these are some images that I've gotten from NRCS archives that show what some of this kind of the denuded moonscape looks like, that's devoid of vegetation. So this first picture here is in, I believe it's Jackson County in 1938, around Pigeon Creek. You can see this giant gully through a field, and just the size relative to the men standing at the bottom. Maybe I'll try out some of these drawing tools. Let's see, spotlight. Here, we can show these guys down here. I got to get out of this spotlight. The next image, this thing's gonna go, is in Monroe County. Similar story. You look at the scale of these gullies. You know, say that this man is 6 feet, and kind of extrapolate that forward. You're looking at probably a 25-foot deep gully right there. Another image from Jackson County in 1938, even a more extreme gully, and you can see the man on the horse at the edge of this. This particular gully, by the time it was all done, ate up about 80 acres of land. And the edge of the gully advanced 3/4 of a mile. The road had to be moved 6 different times to get farther and farther away from this gully that was head cutting and advancing and eating up all this topsoil. So this wasn't just a farm issue at this time. It was really a crisis, a community crisis, a public health crisis. You think about what the implications are for infrastructure and communities and all these sorts of things. Where we're just seeing this massive movement of topsoil. This is taken from a valley floor near a stream. This is 12 feet of topsoil that had been deposited, moved from uplands and deposited into lowlands. And this is still the situation we're dealing with in many places on the landscape in Wisconsin today. But so this erosion was just happening on an unprecedented scale. And following this erosion that wasn't just happening in Wisconsin, but was happening all over the Midwest, we had a series of drought years. And of course, everybody's heard about the Dust Bowl, and where the soil had been moved and had been dried out and then picked up by winds, and you had these massive dust storms that were engulfing the landscape. So what was our response to it? Well, the federal government in 1933 responds with the formation of the Soil Erosion Service. And this is kind of the first notch in the measuring stick on where Wisconsin's relationship with conservation and our nation's relationship with conservation starts for the state of Wisconsin. In 1933, folks like Hugh Hammond Bennett and Aldo Leopold and others with the Soil Erosion Service took an approach for the first watershed-based approach to conservation in the nation, where in Coon Valley, Wisconsin, in Vernon County, they hired a bunch of people and took an approach where they were looking to undo some of the things that had been done by the traditional farming practices that had been in use at that time. So revegetating uplands, fencing streams, keeping cattle out of streams, rotating crops, planting on contours. A lot of the things that you see on the landscape today and some of the same practices we're still using were kind of piloted in 1933 in Coon Valley, Wisconsin. So you talk about Coon Valley, Wisconsin nationally, and it has a lot of meaning to people as the start of the Soil Erosion Service. In 1935, after these issues were continuing on, and there's more dust storms and more erosion across the Great Plains, the federal government was in a situation where they were determining what was their response going to be to these erosion problems that they were seeing. And Hugh Hammond Bennett, who was the head of the SES, was in front of Congress and making an appeal to them that the federal government had to act to do something to abate these issues, these erosion issues that they were facing. And as he's testifying to Congress, a dust storm, which had started somewhere around Kansas, I believe, had literally traveled all the way across the country and had darkened the sky of Washington, D.C. So he's making this appeal to them under this dark and blackened sky of a dust storm. I can't think of a more compelling backdrop to make the case that something needs to be done and the federal government has a role. And lo and behold, they agree and they create the Soil Conservation Service that Bennett is the first head of. Around the same time, just because we have to talk about Aldo Leopold when we talk about conservation in Wisconsin, Aldo Leopold around 1935 began farming his sand farm up in Sauk County near the Wisconsin River. So in 1937, conservation districts were created at the local level as a conservation delivery mechanism in tandem with the Soil Conservation Service. And in 1953, by 1953, there were conservation districts in every county across the state of Wisconsin. And at that time, the first incarnation of Wisconsin Land and Water was actually formed, the Wisconsin Association of Conservation Districts. There have been several incarnations from then till now, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I just want to point out the span of time from 1933, the Coon Valley Project responding to this issue, to having a local conservation implementation workforce in place in 1953 was it's pretty stunning. I know it's 20 years, but just thinking about that, how our capacity to deal with problems today, it seems like it's lightning fast on a federal government level. And then one other really important piece for you all to know, many who are on the call who aren't new staff will know this, but Wisconsin actually kind of took its own step and kind of broke rank from the rest of the country and did away with conservation districts in 1982 and replaced them with land conservation committees, which is the formation that we still have and the governance structure we still have in place today. The idea behind that was it provides a direct link with the local decision makers, with the local tax base. It's an employment source for people locally to house conservation within counties. And at the same time, it's, as everybody probably knows, there's overlaps in conservation with other areas that are adjacent to it, that are affected by it: planning, zoning, land use, all those sorts of things. So that's the model that we have in place today. And it's really an example of conservation innovation and leadership on the part of Wisconsin, since we're the only state that's done this. So that was my admittedly short overview of conservation history in Wisconsin. I'm going to transition to talking a little bit about the roles and responsibilities of LCDs, and you can't talk about that without talking about Chapter 92. I did steal this slide from another presentation that I've given called Why Chapter 92 is Important to You, but decided to keep it because it's true, it's relevant. Chapter 92 is our soil and water conservation and animal waste management law, and it contains very important information about the authorities, the roles, the responsibilities statutorily provided to land conservation committees. There's some pretty interesting language in here that is worth reading. Section 9202 declares soil erosion and the resulting non-point source water pollution in the state to be, quote, endangering the health and welfare of the state's citizens, its recreational resources, agricultural productivity, and industrial base, end quote. It goes on to declare it the policy of the state to, quote, halt and reverse the depletion of the state's soil resources and pollution of its waters, end quote. So these are pretty powerful declarations and really provide a strong backing for the work, the shared work of land conservation committees and land conservation departments. That's not all that's in the statute. It also includes important information about the Soil and Water Resource Management Program administered by DATCP, the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, and also the Land and Water Conservation Board that oversees and approves some policies, but most notably Land and Water Resource Management plans. So I would encourage everybody, if they haven't familiarized themselves with Chapter 92, to copy that link, or I don't know if it's in the chat box, but it's as far as statutory reading goes, it's not that painful. It's only about 8 pages, and it's really an important document that that folks working in the county conservation world and other agency world should know about. In Chapter 92, there are some specific authorities that are spelled out, as I mentioned, for LCCs, and I've just highlighted a couple of them here. 9206 specifies the duties, the powers, and the makeup of land conservation committees, or LCCs. 9209 directs that that LCDs can carry out the LCC powers and directives. So I think that's an important note, that the authorities are granted to the LCCs, and they enable the LCDs to implement these powers that they're granted. In 9210, I mentioned earlier the Land and Water Resource Management Plan. There's language around the guidance of how those plans are prepared and implemented in public processes around that. So there's some pretty important pieces in there to familiarize yourself with. But as I said, just a couple. These are just a couple of the pieces that I wanted to briefly mention that spell out what some of those roles and responsibilities are. However, there are a host of other responsibilities that fall to land conservation departments. There's, I mentioned the land and water resource management planning, but there's watershed plans like TMDLs and lake management plans and river plans. There's strategic planning, administration of grants. Some funding is provided to counties through state contracts and other grants, but there's much hustling of grants that goes on to augment that funding to do the work that has to be done in county LCDs. Providing technical assistance and cost sharing to landowners and farmers. I mean, this is really the land conservation departments are the public. They're the interface with the public in many cases, and technical assistance, cost sharing is one way that happens. A lot of counties help with the monitoring of groundwater quality or quantity, both on a surface and groundwater perspective. Providing information and educational services to the public in any number of different formations. Administering ordinances that counties will have. And assisting landowners with permitting necessary for some conservation projects. Developing partnerships with fellow counties, other interest groups, organizations, et cetera, et cetera. I will say that this slide is by design obnoxiously wordy. It's to make a point that there's a lot that county LCDs do. About half of our county land conservation departments are merged with other departments. That could be forestry, it could be sanitation, zoning, parks, any number of configurations. And in those situations, their list, they'd have about 5 more of these pages. But I guess the point and the upshot here is that this work is uniquely done by county land conservation departments. And the work that those of you who work for county LCDs or will be working for them do is critically important for conservation in our state. And it can be, I think, overwhelming at times. I think it can be a challenge. And I think we should be upfront about the fact that it's going to be a challenge, particularly in this current moment that we're living in. But it's pretty necessary work, and it's essential that we have people who are aware of these challenges and ready to take them on. We spend a fair amount of time at Wisconsin Land and Water with our I'll say our split membership. Half of our members are Land Conservation Committee members, half are Land Conservation Department staff, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But there is this division of responsibilities that I've alluded to a little bit already. That is worth just spending a minute on, and I guess the Cliff's Notes version of this slide is that these division of responsibilities aren't going to be applicable to every county. That it's going to be different in every county, but by and large, the counties whose conservation department functions the best are ones that have a very strong relationship between their LCC and their LCD, and having a strong partnership and strong communication is essential to any work that's going to be done. So there are some things that there's kind of a give and take and a flow of particular activities between the LCC and the LCD. So as talked about with Chapter 92, the LCD sets the policy and program goals, which are implemented and administered by the LCD. Typically, the LCD will develop the Land and Water Resource Management Plan, or the work plan, the annual work plan, which ultimately has to go to the LCC for approval of both of those things. Similar to the budget, developing an annual budget that would typically start with staff in the LCD, which will ultimately be approved by the LCC. And so the LCC is really providing advice and information to the LCC, and the LCC is providing leadership and support to the LCD. And I want to also say that though I've described this as kind of a one-way flow, where, for instance, the Land and Water Resource Management Plan, starting with the LCD and ultimately arriving over at the LCC for approval, it's not a one-way flow of information. The best counties, there's a give and take, there's collaboration, it's back and forth. It's really important that people understand and are curious about this relationship, particularly as a new county conservationist or a new LCC chair, to really get it right, that and get those open lines of communication and collaboration together. And I'll say quickly, if anyone's joining us on the phone, if you can mute yourselves too, getting a little bit of background noise, that would be great. Thank you. So I wanted to kind of enter the last phase of what I want to talk about by introducing Wisconsin Land and Water, or reintroducing for those of you who already know us. We're a pretty unique organization, and I wanted to start with our mission. We're a mission-driven organization. We recently revised our mission, and I think it's really important to put it out there in the front. So our mission is to protect, conserve, and enhance Wisconsin's natural resources by advocating for and supporting county conservation efforts for current and future generations. I think that is really nicely, our board summed up what we do in a way that's digestible and understanding, and really brings in a lot of elements that I'm not going to go into all of the specific details at this point. But who we are a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan 501c3 nonprofit organization. As I mentioned earlier, our members are LCCs and LCDs. We have about 450 LCC members and about 350 LCD staff. So roughly 800 members across the state. I mentioned in that timeline earlier that we were, at least an incarnation of Wisconsin Land and Water, was established in 1953. So the Wisconsin Association of Conservation Districts formed as an organization for district supervisors who oversaw those districts. And there were a couple different incarnations of that as things went on. It changed to the Wisconsin Land Conservation Association. The most recent incarnation was the Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association in 1997 that represented supervisors, LCC members. Meanwhile, in 1984, WALS, the Wisconsin Association of County Land Conservation Employees, was formed in 1984. And they, those two organizations worked in tandem, but ultimately, and they worked closely, and there was a lot of overlap. But in 2012, those two organizations, WALS and the Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association, merged to form what we know today as Wisconsin Land and Water, which is why we have this unique structure. And we are unique nationally in that we have merged these two organizations together. And I think all accounts would be that it's been a successful merger since 2012. It was done for a number of reasons: to be efficient with resources, to have more clout statewide, to be better aligned with our priorities on policy and legislation. But we continue to learn from it, and it's a really robust relationship between elected officials and LCC members and staff, and that model is what we continue with today. I'm very pleased and proud to say that right now we membership organization, so counties pay us membership dues, and right now we have full membership from all 72 counties in the state for the first time ever, which is really outstanding. And I hope we can continue that success in terms of county engagement through their membership dues through the next couple of years, though I know budgets are going to be tight. But that's a really important piece for us, that all counties across the state feel that we represent them, and feel that they show that through paying us membership dues to represent them. We have a professional staff of 7 based out of our Madison office, and I'm going to talk about them next here, if I can get my computer to move. Okay, Wisconsin Land and Water staff roles. So humor my Brady Bunch. You guys are used to seeing tiny little heads in rectangles these days doing all these virtual meetings. That's me. I am our primary lobbyist. We do lobby. We work with the legislature as well as government agencies such as DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, DATCP, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, to really facilitate these connections between the implementers of these programs, county staff and supervisors on the LCCs, and the program, the owners of the programs at the agencies. I also manage and oversee the staff and all the day-to-day operations. We do a fair amount of professional improvement and conservation training opportunities that we provide, which is exactly what we're doing right now. And really, we are a professional organization for counties, so we look to enhance the professionalism of our county members. Chris Schlutt she runs our conference, our annual conference, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which is heavy in training and professional improvement opportunities. And then you know this gal, Penny Poley, who is our training coordinator and membership services coordinator. And Penny exists to help serve our county members' needs and puts on trainings and coordinates with our partners to make sure that people on the ground doing this work have the education and the training resources they need to do their job successfully. Kate Brunner, who I believe you heard from yesterday, is our Standards Oversight Council, or SOC, program manager. I'm not going to go into a whole ton of detail on what Kate does because she presented yesterday, but really the upshot is that it strengthens cooperation among conservation agencies and practitioners, in Kate's case through the development and revision of conservation standards. And similarly, our colleague Christina Anderson runs our source water protection program, which kind of follows the same role of working with agencies, working with counties, but this is around a particular growing concern in the state, which is the safety of drinking water from wells. It's particularly in the last couple of years, it's been a really relevant topic of conversation. So Christina works with counties and with conservation staff to help understand how better to protect sources of private drinking water. So the contributing area, the groundwater that's around a well that gets sucked up when you turn on your tap on a private well. We also have staff person, Elliot Meyer, who's our communications manager. And Elliot, his job is really to increase the public and private support for conservation, to amplify the good work that all of you are doing, that the counties are doing. And he has a number of different initiatives, ways to do that. You know, typical things you'd think of: social media, newsletters. We put out our conservation news, which you'll see. But really, it's been said before that county conservation is the best kept secret in conservation, and we are working to dismantle that and make it a thing of the past. And Elliot is doing heavy lifting in that role. And last but not least, we have Kim Orkentine, who runs our youth conservation education programs and recognition programs. She also is our office manager. So Kim runs the Wisconsin Envirothon that she works with educators around the state on. We also have a conservation awareness poster and speaking contest that culminates at our conference. And then we have 2 youth camps in the summer where youth conservation camps, where middle school and high school students can come for camp. Obviously, many of those things have been delayed, like everything else in the pandemic, but it's a pretty robust program that we have through our youth ed. And it's also worth mentioning that each of our staff are liaisons to a particular committee. And I'm going to transition into talking about committees. So give me just one moment to steal a drink of water. Our committees are active. Our committees are staffed of well, there's a staff liaison from Wisconsin Land+Water, as I mentioned, but they're chaired by either LCD staff or Land Conservation Committee members. And we have our advisors from different agencies that sit on several of them. They're really where we do a lot of our work. Vital work gets done through our committees. And if you're new and you're trying to figure out a way to tow the water and get more involved with Wisconsin Land+Water, this is a great way to do it. All of these committees are in perpetual recruiting mode and always excited to have new people join. So we have the Great Lakes Committee and we have the Mississippi River Basin Committees. Both of those committees deal with issues specific to those watersheds. The Legislative and Administrative Committee is really our policy committee. They're one of our most active committees, especially when the legislature is in session, thinking about our legislative priorities and our policy priorities. We also have our Professional Improvement Committee, which works to plan our annual conference, and they do that in tandem with our technical committee as well. So both of those committees come together, and that's going to start next month for the planning of our conference that happens in March. The technical committee also not only has that responsibility, but they are kind of our network for housing, reviewing standards, reviewing practices, working with agencies on initiatives and policies and rules that are going to be that they're working through to try to get kind of an on-the-ground perspective of how those things will be implemented. So they're also a really active committee. We have a public outreach committee as well that is tasked with engaging people outside of our organization as well as inside our organization on just engaging them in our work and making opportunities for them to feel a part and better understand what we do. And lastly is the Youth Education Committee, which supports those youth education programs that I mentioned earlier, also a very active committee. So I would really just put a strong plug in that this is it's a way to get involved with our association. It's important to talk about our governance structure too. We have 8. You can see all of them, but they're here highlighted in the left. Approximately 7 to 11 counties in each area, and they function somewhat autonomously. They elect officers that lead meetings between them, and have several meetings throughout a year where they meet as an area and talk about issues unique to that area regionally. You can find out more information about them on our website, but it's from the areas that we draw our board members. And from each area comes 2 board members, 1 LCC member and 1 LCD member. And the areas tell us who's going to be on our board. So it's very democratic, small d democratic in that regard. They vote on who their delegates are going to be to our board. The board comes together, and then our leadership structure of our board. So our board is made up of half LCCs, that's 8 people, half LCDs, 8 people. It was set up that way after the merger in 2012. Our executive committee is who leads our board. They are our finance committee. They are kind of our operations committee and able to act in the absence of full board meetings. And hot off the press, and I mean smoking hot off the press, is the 2020 to 22 executive committee, which was elected yesterday afternoon. I can't believe I got the slide updated, but I did. So our executive committee president, who also is the vice chair of the board of directors, is Bob McKeel, county conservationist from Monroe County. Our board of directors chair and vice president of the executive committee is Monty Osterman from Racine County. He's an LCC member. You might be scratching your head at those 2 titles each of them hold. That was kind of a power sharing agreement that was set up with the merger, that if the board chair was an LCC, the executive committee vice president would be an LCD member, and vice versa. Our treasurer is Alan Barrows from the LCD in Waukesha County. Our secretary is Carolyn Scholl, the county conservationist from Vilas County. And then our at-large remaining executive committee members are Melissa Luck from Richland County and Bob Mott from Oneida County. Both of those are LCC members. So that's our leadership structure, which is, again, I think pretty unique. And this is a slide that just kind of shows how these pieces fit together, hopefully. I haven't gone into a ton of detail about our partners over here in the gray, but you will have heard from I think most of these organizations throughout the course of this 3-day training. Our partners are a critical part of what we do. They're represented in many of our committees, as well as advisors to our board of directors. You can see how the area associations fit in this. So hopefully this framework slide is helpful and not more confusing. So if you're not picking up on it, I'm throwing down a plug to get involved with Wisconsin Land and Water. I talked about joining a committee. That's a really critical piece. But really, as I've been in my position for 2 years, what I've really distilled down, one of the most important things about Wisconsin Land and Water and our members is that there is this peer-to-peer learning network. And so I would really encourage you to get involved with us for no other reason than to learn about what if nothing else, to learn about what your colleagues are up to in other counties. And we have tours that happen that can help facilitate that. We have events. We have statewide meetings. We just had the county conservation meeting last Thursday and Friday, our first virtual county conservation meeting. Really, the upshot of this whole thing is, Wisconsin, each county is enabled to be somewhat autonomous and to create its own ordinances and its own policies. It's really 72 laboratories of democracy who are dealing with different issues across the state, as regions will as issues will kind of dictate by region. But there's a lot of shared interests. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to implement nutrient management plans. They're trying to figure out how to get more cover crops on the landscape or do shoreline restoration. And every county is going to approach it somewhat differently. And there is so much opportunity to learn from peers in other counties on how they're challenged by a particular issue that you may be challenged by and have succeeded in finding success on that issue. So it's a really robust network, both for LCCs and LCDs, and that kind of cross-pollination between LCCs and LCDs amongst counties. So that's, if nothing else, that's a really great reason to be involved with Wisconsin Land and Water. I mentioned our area associations. All of the area associations typically do a summer tour where one county will host it, and they'll highlight the work that their partners do, their good conservation projects, It's a great day. Usually there's a bus involved, there's food. It's kind of a musical chairs of who you're sitting with on the bus to be able to kind of make those connections that I talked about a second ago. Obviously, a lot of that's changed right now with the pandemic. We'll see if there's any virtual meetings, but that's just a great way to get involved with area associations. They also hold meetings other than that, 2 to 3 times a year, depending on the area. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depending on the area. We also ask that you get involved with us by sharing success stories. I mentioned Elliot Meyer's job as our communications apparatus to get your stories out to the public. We do have a Conservation Across Wisconsin portal where we ask that we make it really easy for you. If you've done something cool in your county and you want everybody to know about it, we put a pin on a map and a little paragraph with a link to a story about it, and it's a great way to get your county represented to be able to show people what you've done and to see what other people have done. And there may be a link to that in your chat box right now. I can't look at the chat box, but there may be one there. And then lastly, helping to identify training needs. Your input is really important on these sorts of things. You're the people that are on the ground. Obviously, we have some capability to provide trainings like this one in partnership with our partners, both nonprofit organizations, agency partners. And if there are things that you're seeing that you need support on, we have the capacity, and it's Penny's job largely to pull together the right people and the right professionals to get you the resources that you need. There was a training needs assessment that went out last week that many of you may have seen. Might have gone out a little earlier than that, but regardless, we asked for your opinion on that, but that's not the only way to let us know what your needs are. You can provide that input to us at any time, and we'll always do what we can to try to support you as best we can. And our conference slide right now. Our conference is scheduled to be March 3rd to the 5th in the KI Convention Center in Green Bay. It is a fantastic conference. I say it all the time. I came to this conference before I was even on the payroll at Wisconsin Land+Water, and it's really, really a strong conference. Really good technical, policy, and administrative content, not just for staff, but for LCCs, not just for conservation staff, but even administrative staff. Great networking opportunities. We like to have fun. So a lot of professional improvement abilities. And really, it's one of the few events that we have that can support Wisconsin Land and Water financially. We'll keep you posted on what's going to happen with the conference. Obviously, there's a situation with COVID that we're all trying to figure out. I would say, I mentioned next month is when we're going to start planning for it. It would probably be pretty irresponsible for us not to be considering some element of a virtual conference, which after having done a county con meeting, we're optimistic we can do successfully. Regardless, it'll go on. It's just a matter of if it's going to be in person, if it's going to be virtual, or maybe a hybrid. So keep posted on that. We'll keep you posted. You're all on listservs. You get emails from us that you magically started receiving one day, and we make sure we keep the information you need to have in front of you through that mechanism. So there's a ton of closing here. There's a ton of uncertainty that we currently have in front of us. I mean, before the pandemic hit, there was an ag crisis, and there was this moment, there's crisis in farm country, there's crisis for drinking water. In 2019 was the year of clean drinking water. The legislature formed the Water Quality Task Force to try to get their heads around these really intractable problems. And then the pandemic hit, where it's kind of exacerbated these issues, and there's social unrest, and there's no sugarcoating it. We're facing challenges that are really substantial right now in this country. But I wanted to point out that this isn't the first time we faced substantial challenges like this. I'll have you think back to kind of the Dust Bowl and the response to that, and the critical role that conservation efforts and competent, talented, dedicated conservation staff on the ground, working with the land and working with people who manage the land, were able to really find solutions and create some models that we're still using to this day. So it's going to be some tough times as we try to figure out, especially with budgets being tight, how we're going to go forward and what this next chapter looks like for us. But collectively, I would say that you're in the right spot. We're right in the middle of where this implementation happens and the policy gets cooked up, and there's connections to the agencies and to the land managers. And you're part of a really strong network that cares deeply about this work and supports each other. So we're in a unique position to do some good things and to rise to these challenges, and just glad that you're all on board. And I look forward to working with you and kind of writing what this next chapter of history looks like. Maybe it'll look like what this sunny image of the driftless area, obviously not the exact same location as the photo before it, but certainly featuring some of the practices that came out of that tough time look like today, which is a much sunnier picture. So thank you, and I think we might have minutes for some questions.
I haven't seen anyone send them into the chat box yet, so I just sent out a reminder. That's how we're doing questions through the chat box. And we are almost out of time. That was a great presentation, Matt. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but one great place is to either contact me, and I may not know the answer, but I will find someone that can help you. And check out our website. It's a great resource. We have trainings, we have the success stories, we have the youth education information, we have a state directory that has all the land conservation staff and all the supervisors on there. So check out our website at wisconsinlandwater.org. And Mary Hayes said, thank you. The pictures were very interesting. Are they available on the website?
It's a great question. I don't know if they're on our website, but they exist somewhere. I don't know if anyone from NRCS is on the call, but I know they're NRCS's photos. We can maybe follow up with Mary on that.
Okay.
Try to dig them up.
Okay, we'll do that, Mary. Okay. And if anyone else wants them, shoot me an email. My email is penny@wisconsinlandwater.org, and I will get those to you. So I think we're going to wrap up with Matt. So thanks so much, Matt. And we are going to move on to, we're going to make Susan, we have the three ladies from DATCP. We have Susan Mockert, we will have Lisa Trumbull, and we have Kim Carlson. And they will be talking about SWRM plans and also about soil and water resource management grants. So take it away, girls.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks, Penny. We're happy to be with you today. I'm Susan Mockert, and I work with several great programs at the Land and Water Bureau at DATCP, but mainly is SWRM. So that's one of the things we're here to talk about. For the first part of the presentation, I'll be talking on behalf of Lisa Trumbull, who is having some technical and connectivity issues. So I'll try to cover her part of everything, and please send questions in if I leave something out, and I will find your answer for you. One of Lisa's many jobs is to work with all the counties to assure they have land and water resource management plans in place, which is a requirement before you can apply for surface water resource management grants that Kim will speak to later. We will also discuss online resources we have available at DATCP. Land and water resource management plans outline conservation concerns and goals for a 10-year period within a county with a 5-year review and a complete revision of the plan after 10 years. The counties work with DNR and DATCP and a local advisory committee to determine the resource needs for the county. NR 151 implementation, coordination with other government-funded plans, specific goals and objectives, and evaluation and monitoring plans are all a part of your land and water resource management plan. The work plan is submitted annually to DATCP, which will outline conservation goals for the year. These plans are they take a lot of time to put together because you're putting 10 years of planning together at one time. So it's a complicated process, and we're going to walk through it a little bit here with this planning process. As I mentioned above, you'll need to pull together a local advisory committee and then work with the DNR and other resources to gather information about your county. And from that, you can identify goals and establish local priorities. And after you do that, you start developing your plan and then find out who's going to implement it and how it's going to get paid for. And then you need to host a public meeting put the plan out for public notice and have a hearing on it, And after the hearing, you can present the plan to the Land and Water Conservation Board for recommendation for approval. It also needs to go in front of your county board for approval. And then after you do all of that, you can start applying for grants at DATCP. I'll pass it to Kim now.
Thank you, Susan. I'm Kim Carlson, and I work along with Susan Mockert in the SWRM Grant section at DATCP. There are, once you get your land and water resource plan approved, you are eligible to apply for the soil and water resource management grants. There are 3 different types of grants in the SWRM program. One is the staff and support grant, and all counties do differ based on the staffing cost in the county. The second type of grant is the conservation practice cost share, which we also call bond cost share. And those are, that grant is used to reimburse for permanent conservation structures such as manure storage or wetland restorations. The third type of grant is nutrient management cost share. And not all counties apply for this, most counties do. Those grants are used to support the development of nutrient management plans by landowners, but can also be used for 50% of the award can also be used for cover crops and other cropping practices. This is our SWRM timeline, and just a quick in what happens and what you'll see from us asking the counties. In January, on January 1st, you are allowed to start writing cost share contracts with landowners for that year's funding. So right now you'd be writing cost share contracts to use up your 2020 cost share awards between the landowners and the county. February 15th is when all reimbursement requests are due for the previous year's grant funds. April 15th, the grant application is due to apply for next year's grant funds, and also the current year land and water plan is due. December 1st is the last day to request a transfer of cost share funds between the counties. And then December 31st is the last day to submit an extension request on cost share contracts that weren't finished that year. You can extend the cost share contract for 1 calendar year. This is a 1-year grant cycle for a cost share contract. Just for example, you sign the cost share contract for 2020 funds. You sign it this year, the year it's awarded, and complete the project by December 31st. And if it isn't completed, you can extend the contract for 1 year. If the contract's completed, counties must pay the landowners by January 31st of the next year, and then request reimbursement requests to DATCP, send those in by February 15th of the next year. And then we pay the county. This is our last slide, and it's a little busy. This is also on the same slide as on our SWRM Grant Resources webpage, and it just has 6 different sections to look at different items. Section 1 is an overview of the SWRM program. Section 2 has policies and procedures, such as if does a contract, cost share contract, need to be recorded, or I'm sorry, notarized. Cultural resource procedure outlines, stuff like that. Section 3 are where you'll find our mini forms, such as the cost share contract, reimbursement request form, extension request form. Section 5 has reimbursement request examples. If you're looking for some ideas of how does this go together, you can look at that section. I'm sorry, that was section 4. Section 5 has links to non-DATCP documents such as DNR and NRCS documents that are used in conjunction with our SWRM documents. And then section 6 is where you'll find the SWRM grant application and also the allocation information. And that covers it.
So it is 2:15, and our next presenters are going to be Tim Jackson from DATCP and Aaron O'Rourke from DNR. And they're going to be talking about CAFOs and the livestock facility siting. So I am going to let Tim take over.
Thanks, Penny. All right, everybody. My name is Tim Jackson. I work for DATCP here in the Planning and Ordinances Unit. I'll be giving you a quick and dirty presentation on the livestock facility siting program today. As Penny said, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just send them in the chat and we'll have some time at the end of my presentation here. I'll see if I can answer them. Otherwise, let's get started. All right, so first some background on the livestock facility siting law. So the livestock facility siting law references Chapter 93 of Wisconsin State Statute and Administrative Rule, or ADCAP 51. Together they provide the opportunity for local authorities, such as a county or a town, to regulate location and operation of livestock facilities. It's important to note that this is the only authority that a local government can use to regulate livestock facilities. If it's not done within the scope of these two, or of the law, excuse me, local governments cannot regulate the location of livestock facilities. So it has to be done within the constraints of Chapter 93 and ADCAP 51. There are two main ways that a local authority can adopt a siting ordinance. The first is through a general zoning ordinance, which is administered through a general zoning authority. So if a county or town already has adopted a general zoning authority, siting can be worked into the existing zoning ordinance. The other way is through a licensing ordinance, which is administered through an adopted authority. The big difference here is that a zoning ordinance can be administered, like I said, through general zoning. A licensing does not need general zoning to administer authority. So if a county or town does not have a general zoning authority, but they'll want to regulate livestock facilities, they can do so through a licensing ordinance. What does livestock siting regulate? It regulates new or expanding facilities with 500 or more animal units, potentially less than 500 if more restrictive ordinance existed before 2003. An example of that is Jefferson County. I believe their threshold is 150 animal units because they had it in place before the statute was enacted. They can also choose a higher threshold if they wanted to only regulate facilities with 750 or more, or only facility of CAFO size at 1,000 or more animal units. That's also an option. For some context, you can see there on the slide, it's about 357 milking cows, 1,250 pigs of 55 pounds to market weight, or 50,000 egg layers is what 500 animal units would be. It also regulates setbacks from roads and property lines, so it does set maximums for those setbacks. Part of the intent there is to prevent a prohibition. So if you have a huge setback, like a quarter-mile setback from property line, that essentially prohibits a facility from being sited in some places. So it's supposed to set constraints like that. It also regulates nutrient management and waste storage. It does use the standards from NRCS 590 to the 2005 iteration. A side note there is that if a livestock facility is of CAFO size and has a WPDS permit, they can substitute that into the application instead of the worksheets that are provided as part of the siting application. A big factor of the program is our odor control. I'll go over that more in the next slide. And it also limits the exclusion of facilities in ag zoning districts and it ensures that there is always a place for a livestock facility in an ag zoning district, so it's not flat out prohibited from being sited anywhere. You know, any facility of any size is supposed to have a place. So a big part of the program is the odor control, predictive odor for a facility that's applying as a new or expanded facility. Has to score their predictive odor. 500 or more points is passing. The score is a number that is calculated based on the size and number of animal housing, waste storage, and animal lots, as well as the nearest affected neighbors. Nearest affected neighbors are adjacent residences or high-use buildings that are not associated with the livestock facility. That can affect if they're closer or they're more numerous, that can affect the score. Like, for example, a facility that's sort of off on their own in the middle of nowhere, would score higher compared to a facility that's got a dozen homes directly adjacent to it. So credits are also given for odor control practices, such as frequent cleaning of animal housing, natural surface crushing of a manure storage pit, or freshwater flushing of animal housing. The credits are a way to add on points to that score. And in some instances, the credits are what provide a passing score for a facility. Now, the odor score and the practices are locked in for the duration of a permit if it is approved. And what that means is that, let's say a facility is approved for a permit where they list freshwater flushing and allowing a natural surface to crush in their manure storage pits. They, at a minimum, have to maintain those practices, because if they were to discontinue one or the other, it would alter that odor score. So those practices are locked in for the duration of the permit. Any changes have to be submitted as an amendment to their permit to the proper permitting authority. What is DATCP's role in the livestock facility siting program? Our role is to assist local jurisdictions in adopting a proper siting ordinance in compliance with Chapter 93 and AdCap 51 to make sure that the regulatory authority is staying within the constraints provided in those two pieces of legislature. It can be a cumbersome program for some either townships or counties with limited staff to administer, especially if you get a lot of applications, or for instance, if it's a township that has adopted siting and they only get one application every couple of years, they may not be well versed enough to do that without either some resources that we can provide them or a phone call or whatever we can do to assist in the implementation of the program. In addition, all siting authorities must provide DATCP with copies of approved or denied applications with dates of meetings when they send notices out, and then a written record of decision if it was approved or denied. So that's so that we have a record of all of the facilities that have been permitted under the program. Another aspect of DATCP's role is the Livestock Siting Review Board. Now, the review board is independent of DATCP. It's supported by DATCP staff, but they have members that are appointed by various associations, such as an environmental representative, counties association representative, towns association representative, different individuals represent different stakeholder interests around the state. And the purpose of the review board is to review appeals to local decisions. So if a facility is denied an application and they wish to appeal that denial, it goes before the review board. On the inverse, if a permit is granted and for some reason, like a adjacent landowner or somebody takes an issue with that, wishes to appeal the approval, that also goes before the review board. This is probably a small to you, but it's a map of our permitting authorities and some of the siting permits that exist throughout the state as of November of last year. As you can see, there's quite a few that are being permitted below the CAFO level. That is the kind of brighter orange dots there. Those have quite a few counties and quite a few townships as well that have adopted their own siting ordinance. So that's all I have for a presentation. I don't see any questions in the chat right now. If you do, send them in and I'll do my best to answer them while we still have some time here. Otherwise, my contact info is on the slide. If you have any questions or just want some information about the program, give me a call or shoot me an email. Otherwise, you can visit our website there, livestock.siting.wi.gov, for some more information. We've got a lot of resources on there, some informational resources. So if anybody has any questions, send them in.
Send them in, or else if you want to unmute yourself while we get Aaron loaded up. Someone wants to talk verbally, undo your mute and talk to Tim, and we'll get Aaron ready to go with his. Do you want to get started then, Aaron?
Yeah. All right. My name is Aaron Rourke. I'm the Nutrient Management Program Coordinator in the CAFO program for DNR. So I work specifically with nutrient management for CAFOs However, I'm going to be giving a little bit of an overview on the CAFO program itself first, and then I'll actually be here for the next one too, talking about nutrient management. So kind of like what Tim was explaining, that's a level of regulation that the county can use in coordination with DATCP. However, once a farm hits a 1,000 animal unit cap, they have what's called in Wisconsin a duty to apply. So what the duty to apply in Wisconsin states is that it's presumed that if you're over 1,000 animal units, that you have a potential to impact ground and surface waters of the state. And so that's why we require farms to apply for what's called a WPDS permit, and that stands for Wisconsin Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. So it's basically a discharge permit like an industrial factory would get if they're processing water and discharging that water. Like Tim explained too, an animal unit roughly is like around 1,000 pounds of an animal. So yeah, around that, like 800-ish milking cows would put you around 1,000 animal units. But we have CAFO facilities of all types. We've got dairy, obviously, is the biggest one. Beef, turkeys, ducks, chickens, swine is a growing in popularity. Sheep, and also we even have a mink farm that's a CAFO facility. And if you don't know what CAFO stands for, it's their concentrated animal feeding operation. You can have a permit if you're under 1,000 animal units. If you run into issues where you've had a discharge of pollutants to waters of the state, and you would go to enforcement and go to the Department of Justice because of that issue, it's a possibility that they'll charge you with having to get a WPDS permit. So we have probably a handful of farms that are under 1,000 animal units that have this permit. So this permit is strictly a water quality protection permit, and it's based on a federal program, NPDES program, and what the states have the option of doing is either to adopt verbatim what the federal permit program requires, or they can kind of make their own as long as what their permit program has at least matches EPA. So that's what Wisconsin has done, is they've created their own permit program that follows the federal program and then is more specific to Wisconsin. This permit is regulating the CAFO's manure and processed wastewater along with their production site, like where the actual animals are raised and milked and things like that. However, unlike the livestock siting, this permit does not address air quality, odor control, noise, or traffic. If a CAFO's in a county that has regulations for this, they would be regulated by the county. We would not be enforcing on any of that kind of stuff through this permit. And also, unlike the livestock siting, this is not a siting program. We cannot write tickets if things happen. So we have a stepped enforcement process where if a farm has a spill or has an issue, they'll get a notice of noncompliance, and then if they keep continuing, notice of violation, and then eventually, if it gets bad enough, we can refer them to the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice would be the one that would look into the case and charge any kind of citation or something like that. So the permits that are issued to these farms are 5-year permits. They, like I said, take care of the production site. So basically the production site the farm has is a zero discharge type production site, except for very limited circumstances. So most people have full containment. However, that's not required, but that's a trend that's happening. Is it's easier to just store all of your processed wastewater manure than to try to navigate that through like a vegetated treatment area, which is like a big grassy area that has filters through it. So the production sites are typically a zero discharge. And then also it regulates land application sites. This would be the application of manure and processed wastewater on crop fields. This is managed with a nutrient management plan, and the nutrient management plan has to follow the NRCS 590, which is the standard for nutrient management in Wisconsin. But then along with meeting that, it also has to meet NR 243, 1.4 specifically for nutrient management. But NR 243 is the code that regulates CAFOs specifically. It has all the information on application requirements, manure storage requirements, nutrient management requirements, reporting requirements. Also, the CAFOs are self-regulated in a way, so they have a responsibility to make sure that all of their information for their farm and their NMP is up to date each year, and then they are required to submit 2 different updates. One being the annual report, which is due every January 31st. This has information about the inspections that were done on the farm, from the farm. 180-day storage, which is the requirement that CAFOs have. You have to have at least 180 days to store manure. So depending on the volume that you produce each year, that storage capacity could be different. As long as it equals 180 days, you're good. You're reporting on how many animals you have, and then if there's any planned changes in the future. Another update they're required to submit is the NMP update, which is due every March 31st. So what this does is it shows what actually happened on the farm the last crop year, and then also shows if there's any changes moving forward to the nutrient management plan. It also includes field verification logs. So CAFOs are required to check depth groundwater. They're required to meet more strict setbacks to streams and waterways, wells, things like that. So if there's any kind of verification log that's required, they have to submit that. Any new fields that were added to the plan, any fields that were removed from the plan, and then updated manure and soil test results. So all the things that kind of go into a nutrient management plan, they're just required to post updates on those every year. And like I said, the next presentation that I'll be doing is going to dive more in depth into the nutrient management plan itself for CAFOs. And then just to kind of show you how a process works for permitting, the farm would, well, they're supposed to apply for a permit 12 months prior to reaching that 1,000 animal units. This doesn't always happen. Sometimes they apply after they've hit that, which is in violation of state law. But how it's supposed to work is they submit an application 12 months prior to reaching that cap. This is all done online, all the applications. We, as a program, would visit the site, make sure everything's meeting the requirements of the permit. And then the operation would submit a final application with their application materials, their nutrient management plan, any kind of manure storages or designs that they have to implement within the permit term, their 180-day storage, and then environmental analysis if that's needed. Then once that application is final, the different parts that are reviewed would be sent off to different people in the program. So we have engineers that review plans and specs for engineering type submittals, and then we also have the nutrient management side that reviews the nutrient management submittals. Once all of those are submitted and approved through our reviewers, then the whole permit is public noticed. There's an opportunity for the public to input either verbally or written any kind of issues that they have with the permit. If there's 5 or more people that request it, we have an actual in-person public hearing where people can provide comments. Then we respond to those public comments as best as possible, and then the permit would be issued. And that's all I got.
Okay. So any questions for Aaron or Tim? Kathy Cooper from Richland County had asked previously, I think for Tim, you are the person to go to when we have a question or concerns on our livestock siting licensing ordinance. So who would Kathy from Richland County, the LCD, get in contact with?
Yep. So Kathy, there's a team that supports the program at DATCP, but I am the point of contact for the program. My information was up on the screen. If you didn't get it, it is on the website as well if you need to get in touch with me.
Okay, so we're going to call it quits and we'll get started with our next one. Our next presentation, again, we're going to have Aaron again from DNR and Ryan Earsman from DATCP to talk about nutrient management. Thanks, Tim and Aaron. Aaron, don't run away. Tim, you can stay and listen if you like. Thanks very much for joining us for the presentation and doing it for us today. And I will try to find Ryan. Thanks, Tim. Okay, let's move on to the next one.
Okay, thanks, Penny. So this is nutrient management in about 6 minutes or less. All right, so you hear people talking about performance standards and technical standards, and the quick overview is that Chapter 281 says that DNR creates a performance standard and DATCP develops the technical standard to implement that performance standard. So in the case of nutrient management, NR 151 runoff management is the performance standard, and ATCAP 50 from Department of Agriculture is the technical standard. And then what we use to actually apply that standard is NRCS Code 590 on nutrient management, and that is the details of how to do a nutrient management plan. Overall, if you think about this, the very simple way is 590 is how we do it to accomplish what is in ATCAP 50 to achieve the results that are outlined in NR 151. And I wish somebody had explained that to me when I first started. Okay, so what is nutrient management? Pretty simply, it is figuring out manure and fertilizer applied at the right time, the right rate, and the right placement to feed the crop's needs. We start out with soil tests. We map the field so that we know the soil types and the slope and the soil's texture, and then we figure out how much manure that farm is producing every day to get an annual allocation of manure. The next thing we do is we figure out what's the farm's crop rotation, and then what's the tillage that's happening within that crop rotation, where we need to apply manure to make sure we get it spread and used in the best manner possible, and then finally add any fertilizer that we need for additional crop needs. That's kind of the visual of nutrient management. All of this is done in Snap+, which is a University of Wisconsin developed piece of software that is basically a giant nutrient management calculator. This is what Snap+ looks like. This is the cropping screen, which allows you to see, for example, this is a single field across several years of its rotations, what crops are in our yield goals, what type of tillage, and how much manure or fertilizer is applied in those different years. And so what Snap+ will do is it has 590 and 82809 programmed in, as well as Russell 2 programmed in the background, and it'll tell you if you have an over application of manure in a situation. It'll tell you if you have excessive tillage. Essentially, if Snap+ makes a red or an orange box, it's telling you you're probably not doing something right per nutrient management. Ultimately, the idea is with a good nutrient management plan, we keep manure and fertilizers on the fields where they're doing what they're supposed to do and out of our surface and groundwater. Because NP and K cost money, and you only want farmers to pay for exactly what the crop needs and not for more than the crop can use, because that excess can end up as runoff. Additionally, the nutrient management planning software also allows us to analyze the tillages that we're doing across the rotation and reduce the soil loss, because too much soil loss, one, is forcing us to lose the most valuable asset on the farm, which is the soil, and that also ends up as sediment. That is nutrient management in a very short and quick nutshell. snapplus.wisc.edu will get you to the SnapPlus software. Searching nutrient management at DATCP.wi.gov will get you to the nutrient management page. And that is my contact information below.
Okay, is there any questions out there? I'm going to start getting Aaron's presentation up with him. So any questions for Ryan? Well, we got a few minutes in between here. And if you've been listening, it's been pretty quiet for questions. So maybe everyone's going to contact people directly afterwards. But we will get Aaron's loaded and get him started, and then we'll take questions again at the end. So Aaron, if you're ready, and you can start, I believe.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and I can see you. And your PowerPoint is ready to go.
All right. So like I was talking about before, my main kind of task in the CAFO program is working with nutrient management. So I'm just going to give a little brief overview on nutrient management specific to CAFOs. All right, so when the CAFOs apply for the 5-year permit that I was talking about, they are required to submit a 5-year nutrient management plan. So what this nutrient management plan has to show is that the farm has adequate acres in the plan to apply all the manure and processed wastewater that they're going to produce throughout the permit term, that being 5 years. So they actually have to plan out their manure and processed wastewater and fertilizer their applications throughout the entirety of 5 years when they submit that to us. And by doing that, they also have to meet all rotational requirements from NRCS 590 that was just talked about. And so when we review these, we make sure that they have enough, or they have manure planned that equals to or exceeds what they're going to plan to produce each year. If they can show that, and they can show they meet all the other requirements of a nutrient management plan, we can safely say that they have adequate acres. So the kind of the regulations that they have to abide by for nutrient management is NRCS 590, which is, like I said, the standard for the state, and then also NR 243. So 590 for CAFOs, they have to use that standard mostly for fertilizer applications, because the CAFO permit, like I said in the prior presentation, does not regulate fertilizer. It regulates the manure and processed wastewater produced by the farm. So when it comes to fertilizer applications, they have to meet NRCS 590, but then manure and processed wastewater applications, they have to follow NR 243.14. So the nutrient management section of 243 is a more restrictive code than 590 when it comes to manure and processed wastewater applications. Most of these more restrictive features come from applications around streams, lakes, wells, wetlands, things like that. So all the 5-year NMPs, along with all the other information for WPDS application, has to go through the DNR's e-permitting system. So this is an online permitting system that's used for the 5-year application for the permit, 5-year NMPs, substantial revisions, which are any kind of changes to the NMP during the course of the permit, engineering information like evaluations and plans and specs. So the submittal of this application comes from the farmer along with the farm representative or a nutrient management planner or an engineer. It depends who the farm selects to be the one to actually input the information. And then all of the information has to be submitted to the department, including the NMP, and approved as a complete application before it goes out to the DNR reviewers. So essentially what we're looking for in a CAFO NMP is a narrative that explains how the farm works, how they're going to manage the manure, how much they're producing, the processes they're going to take for field verifications on the application fields and things like that. So we're looking for a narrative. And then we're also looking for SNAP Plus reports, because that's going to give us the information that we need to make sure that the nutrient management is in compliance with NRCS 590 and NR 243. And this is just a list of the SNAP Plus reports that we typically would ask for. And we do have authority to ask for any additional information to the nutrient management plan if we don't understand something or if we find a mistake in the plan. Also, a really essential item is restriction maps. Like I said, there's additional restrictions for CAFOs when it comes to land applications. And so in the SNAP Plus program that was just talked about, there's an option to turn on CAFO setbacks. And so you can see on the bottom left there is just an example of what a CAFO application or restriction map would look like. So those purple areas are what we call SWCMAs, or surface water quality management areas. Those are the big emphasis for CAFOs, because there's certain criteria based on how you're applying manure that you have to do in those areas. So the most common ones are if you're injecting manure or you're incorporating manure immediately, you have to stay back 25 feet from those waterways, and then you have to do that injection or incorporation within the rest of that 300 feet. For lakes, it's 1,000 feet. And then also, if you're surface applying manure, the most popular one is to stay back 100 feet from those waterways. So we're looking for a spring, summer, fall spreading map, but then also a winter spreading map. And then if the farm plans to do any manure, process, wastewater, irrigation, we would need maps for that. And then obviously manure samples and soil test results, because you cannot really have an accurate nutrient management plan without those. One big difference from CAFOs to non-CAFO farms when it comes to nutrient management is non-permitted farms. They can use book values for their manure, and those book values are in the 820-809 publication from UW that has all crop nutrient recommendations in it. It's advised that non-permitted farms test their manure and use that, but it's an option for them to use book values. For CAFOs, they're required to test their manure multiple times a year, and then even more frequently in months where they are actually applying the manure. And they have to use those actual manure analysis numbers in their nutrient management plan when they update it, and use an average when they're planning. So what we're typically looking for is just, first of all, accurate NMP information, the farm information, strategies that the farm is going to use, that they acknowledge that there are reporting requirements for the nutrient management plan, and then does it comply with all the requirements in NR 243.14. Again, the biggest thing is adequate land base to spread all of their manure throughout their permit term, restriction maps, and then rotational nutrient management issues like phosphorus index, which is a rotational value of 6 or less, and then also soil loss, which is the T value for each field. We do have additional restrictions on soil test phosphorus in fields. If you're over 100 parts per million soil test P, there is a requirement to draw down that soil test P within the rotation by 50%. And then another kind of unique thing for CAFOs is that if the soil test P is over 200 parts per million, we prohibit any kind of manure or process wastewater applications from taking place. The farm can still apply fertilizer, but they are prohibited from any manure or process wastewater applications until that's drawn down. Soil tests. This is pretty standard for all nutrient management in the state, but they're required to, or the fields are required to be tested every 4 years. If we have fields that the farm or the CAFO has in their plan that has old soil tests, again, they're prohibited from any kind of manure process wastewater applications until those are updated. And then again, the manure analysis, they're required to test. If they're a new permittee and they haven't been a CAFO before, we would allow them to start their planning by using the book values. But when they actually apply the manure after the permit's been issued, they have to use the actual samples. That's kind of it. Like I said, there's really a big difference for the manure and processed wastewater application restrictions between non-permitted farms and permitted farms. So if you have any questions specifically about CAFOs and their manure applications, you should contact DNR. That'd be myself or Ashley Scheel. If it's for a non-permitted farm, then DATCP is definitely the best option for you to go to. I think that is it.
Thanks, Aaron. We had a question for you, and then we have also one for Tim. But the first one for Aaron is, isn't winter manure spreading not allowed under NR 151?
It's allowed under NR 151. There are restrictions to winter spreading in both NRCS 590 and then additional winter spreading restrictions in NR 243. For the CAFO program, I'll comment specifically on that. What we have is that you cannot surface apply liquid manure at all when the ground is frozen or snow covered. There are certain allowances for solid manure in those frozen or snow covered conditions. It all depends on how much snow there is and the application method that you're using. DNR also has an outright prohibition on any kind of surface application of manure in February and March. We call that the high risk runoff period. So the farm does have the ability to winter apply. Mostly that ability is going to come from solid manure, but no, there's no outright prohibition on that in NR 151.
Okay, great. And then Kathy had asked, I think this was because it's for DATCP for Tim, so I think you're still there. Will DATCP continue to assist counties with farmer training for nutrient management plans? Maybe that's because of retirement or?
Yeah, so this is Ryan.
Oh, Ryan, sorry.
We will, but it's not going to look the way it used to, both with our reduced staff and staff has not been able to add additional people. Right now, just like we are in this case with social distancing restrictions, we are preparing to figure out other ways to actually make doing nutrient management planning and the training using SNAP Plus far easier for the end user to learn without us having to be in the room. It has been that, yeah, you have staff going around, showing up to these trainings and co-piloting computers with farmers, and we can't do that under social distancing. So we're trying to figure out how to make it a program that's easier for people to learn without us being present. That's a change in both the program itself. It's also going to be a change in a lot of the learning tools and educational materials that will be coming out of our partner at UW with nutrient and pest management. I have been doing a lot of online training through Microsoft Teams with county staff to help them get spun up on getting better with SNAP Plus. But we're also aware that for a lot of farmers, they simply do not have the computer access, or I should say the internet access, or in some cases computers, in order to do it on their own. That's not a hurdle that we've gotten over yet, but we're working on it.
Okay, I think we can get started. Everyone's clock's probably a little bit different, but I have 3:15. So Andrew's gonna be with us for the next half hour. He's back. He was here yesterday, did a presentation, and so send your questions into the chat box and we will take those when Andrew was done. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Penny. Welcome back, everyone. We're a little later in the afternoon, so hopefully everyone's still alert and awake. I'll warn you right now, the first couple slides of this presentation are a lot of words. I'll try to be brief and concise in what I'm talking to you about. As you can see on your screen here today, I'm here to talk to you about the Clean Water Act, what are called impaired waters, waters that have a higher pollutant concentration, so they aren't fishable, swimmable, or drinkable anymore. TMDLs, total maximum daily loads, and finally, 9 key element watershed-based plans. My name again is Andrew Craig. I'm DNR's Watershed Planning Coordinator. I work on a statewide basis in the non-point source program. Yesterday, I presented on the DNR's non-point source program, gave a little history of where we were when it was first started and how it's changed over time. And I alluded to this presentation that I'm going to give you today. So there will be some overlap. So let's get started talking about the Clean Water Act. The Federal Clean Water Act was initially passed in 1948 in the United States, and it was the first major law to address water pollution in our country. Moving forward from 1948, there were some sweeping amendments to the Clean Water Act in 1972 due to increasing awareness and concern for water pollution. Some of you have seen or were alive at that point in time when the Cuyahoga River in Ohio was on fire, and there were other significant events where rivers were being used commonly as sewers and other waste disposal mechanisms. So when the law was amended in 1972, it became the Clean Water Act. Since 1972, the Clean Water Act has been amended further in 1977 and 1987. Specifically in 1987, the amendments created the non-point source management program under the Clean Water Act, specifically Section 319. And this part of the Clean Water Act has significant importance to many states in our country, because they receive grants from the federal EPA to address non-point source pollution, which I was talking about yesterday. So a little history about the Clean Water Act. What does the Clean Water Act require or do? It requires both the Environmental Protection Agency and states implement a water pollution control program. And those programs basically consist of setting standards for industry, how much pollution can they release into a river, stream, or lake. It requires EPA and states to set criteria, either numeric or narrative criteria for pollutants in surface waters. That's rivers, streams, lakes, and so forth. I'm hearing somebody talking. Someone got their not muted. I'll keep going. And the last part of the Clean Water Act, which is one of the biggest challenges remaining, is reducing non-point sources of pollution. In 1972, the Clean Water Act made it unlawful to discharge from a point source to navigable waters unless a permit was provided that allowed the discharge and controlled its concentration, volumes, and other things, so rivers, streams, and lakes can maintain their physical, chemical, and biological uses. There was an exemption, however, for agricultural stormwater discharges. So when it rains and stormwater comes in contact with the agricultural field and that water flows off the field into a river, stream, or ditch, that was exempted from the Clean Water Act pollution point source program. Same thing for irrigation return flows, which we don't have very many in Wisconsin, but certainly there's a lot out west. Last point, the Clean Water Act does not directly address groundwater. Those groundwater protection provisions are centered within the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, and Superfund. So a little bit more about the Clean Water Act. It not only does it require to set a permitting program and setting standards for surface waters, but it also requires EPA and states to monitor rivers, lakes, and streams and establish, just like I said earlier, water quality standards for those surface water bodies. Water quality standards are site-specific pollutant levels for those waterways that I just described. In our state, Wisconsin DNR sets water quality standards in conjunction with EPA by designating uses for the water body. How much pollution can a water body receive and still be fishable, swimmable, or drinkable, or have recreation? And that applies through numeric or narrative water quality criteria to protect the uses of the water body. So I'm going to try to tie all these things together. Under the Clean Water Act, there are impaired waters and TMDLs. How these three items fit together, like I was explaining before, Wisconsin monitors a percentage of all water bodies across the state every 2 years. And that is a requirement of the Clean Water Act that states assess and evaluate how their water bodies, what condition their water bodies are within. And do they meet numeric or narrative criteria or not? Those that don't meet the criteria or the water quality standards that I just explained are placed on a list called the 303D list, which is also known as the impaired waters list. If a water body makes it on the impaired waters list, the Clean Water Act requires states to complete what's called a total maximum daily load study or report that is designed to restore impaired waters. And US EPA reviews and approves or disapproves of those TMDLs. I'm going to be showing you a map a little bit later showing the extent and the types of TMDLs we have within Wisconsin. That's why I'm spending so much time about what this is right now. Essentially, a TMDL determines the maximum amount of pollution a water body can receive and still meet standards. And last, this is where 9-element plans come in. Once a TMDL is complete, there is a need to do an implementation plan to reduce pollutant loadings and meet water quality standards. Essentially, TMDLs tell us how much pollution reduction is needed, but it does not explain how to get there. And a little bit later, I'm going to tell you about 9-element plans. That's the main way we're trying to implement and meet TMDL reductions. So I alluded to and showed you this slide yesterday, talking about DNR's non-point source program. This is a graphic representation of the impaired waters as of 2018 within Wisconsin. And the sources of those impaired waters is non-point source pollution. You can see on the pie chart here, the blue area and the red area represent non-point and a blend of point source and non-point sources. In total, that represents approximately 75% of impaired waters are directly or indirectly caused by non-point source pollution. So there's a lot of work left on non-point sources. Under the Clean Water Act, we have made some significant progress towards addressing point source discharges, and many rivers and streams and lakes have improved in their water quality compared to where they were back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Okay, moving away from words, now I'm showing you pictures and maps. All what I was talking to you about were impaired waters and the extent of TMDLs within Wisconsin, and that's what this map shows as of 2018. The main four pollutants are phosphorus, sediment, bacteria, and toxics. And the impaired waters are the red segments you see here. There are some large reservoirs, there are rivers, there are streams and lakes that are listed as impaired for one or more of these primary pollutants. Down here in the legend, you can see there's different types of TMDL areas within Wisconsin. The light green and dark green ones are TMDLs that are either being implemented or under development. And the blue one represents one that was recently approved. I'll start with this blue one. This is the Wisconsin River Basin. It's pretty much the largest TMDL that we have within the state of Wisconsin. This is about 9,000 square miles. And the main phosphorus is the main pollutant for that TMDL. Just to the right here is the Upper Fox Wolf River Basin. This is about 6,000 square miles. And again, that's for phosphorus and sediment TMDL as well. This one is was recently approved in 2020, so this should now be a lighter green color. The Lower Fox River Basin here, that was a TMDL that we produced and was approved in 2012. And that's for phosphorus and sediment. Down here, the Rock River Basin is another phosphorus and sediment-based TMDL, as is the Milwaukee River Basin right here. So that's a pretty big swath of territory that are approved TMDLs in our state for those pollutants. A couple more items I want to explain briefly. This is the Northeast Lakeshore TMDL area, which encapsulates multiple counties along the eastern side of our state. And all these areas are rivers that discharge into Lake Michigan. That TMDL is under development, but will not be complete until 2022. Up here in the Northwest, there are some very large TMDL basins. This one is for meeting Lake St. Croix right along here along the Mississippi River, and our border with our neighbors in Minnesota, Tanner Lake, Lake Minoman, and so forth. I won't go through the rest of these small ones, but this map is available on our webpage. So we have a lot of TMDLs, and there are others, but the main ones are for phosphorus and sediment. So Clean Water Act requires that you assess waters, and if they are impaired, you develop TMDLs. Pretty much approximately 70% of the area of our state is under a phosphorus or sediment-based TMDL. So now I want to make a transition to 9 key element watershed-based plans. So let me tell you about those. So 9 element plans are watershed-based plans. They're usually about 35 square miles or a Huck 12 size watershed. And their main goal is to restore impaired waters or protect non-impaired waters. So they can be a protection-based plan or a restoration-based plan. Often 9 element plans are used to restore surface waters, which is a pretty common. But a lot of our drinking water supplies in Wisconsin, over 90%, are from groundwater, and that's uncommon, but that is starting to change. There are several counties in our state that are starting to develop groundwater-focused 9 element watershed-based plans, which is entirely possible. The main objective here of these plans are to reduce non-point sources, so waters can meet water quality standards and maintain uses like I talked about. And that mimics TMDLs, which I told you about briefly. They also can mimic or help implement source water protection plans. And Matt Otto from NRCS talked about source water protection plans a little bit yesterday. So this is probably the most important point I can tell you about 9 element watershed-based plans. In Wisconsin, we are trying to use these plans as a framework to focus existing activities and or other plans like county land water plans to focus there within a specific watershed. And there are several other plans out there, and 9 element plans can reference or cross-reference or incorporate what's in these other plans or programs like the Farmland Preservation Program. They certainly have to incorporate the NR 151 performance standards, which I mentioned and described yesterday, as well as county ordinances. They can reference and use findings from TMDL reports. They can include or make you become eligible for federal or state grant programs. And I talked a little bit about some of those programs yesterday, like the Targeted Runoff Management Program, Notice of Discharge, And there are other grant programs that 9 plans can focus and help use those funds effectively. We have many farmer-led councils within Wisconsin, and that's a program that's promoted and administered, a grant program that's promoted and administered by the Department of Agriculture. And there are lots of demonstration farms that are popping up as related to the farmer-led councils that are promoting soil health and other soil conservation practices. 9 plans can incorporate them too. Then there's lake management plans and monitoring. And finally, point source options like trading, adaptive management, and the multi-discharge variants. So I'm going to try now to give you a summary of the 9 elements. This is the very this is the Reader's Digest approach. The first 3 elements describe watershed conditions and set goals to address pollution sources in the watershed. And then the remaining 6 elements determine the specific resources and criteria you need to implement and evaluate how the plan's being implemented. The Environmental Protection Agency came up with the 9 elements. And I'm going to go through those with you right now, one by one. The first one is identifying what are the causes and sources of pollution that need reduction in a watershed. Now, I won't go through all these smaller details. I'll leave it up to you guys to read this later. If you have questions about specifics, I'm more than willing to, as a statewide planning coordinator for watershed plans, I can talk a lot in more detail about some of these things if you have follow-up questions. Element 2, once you identify causes and sources, you need to try to set some load reductions to meet or make progress towards meeting water quality standards vis-a-vis the Clean Water Act. The other thing you need to do is, if you identify practices, you need to estimate what type of load reductions those practices will generate in terms of phosphorus reductions. And those can be done using models or other methods. Element 3 specifically says you need to identify practices, and really, this is really important, what critical areas in the watershed where practices will get you the biggest bang for your buck or achieve significant load reductions. This takes some time to identify, but at DNR we have several tools that we've developed that can make that easier on agricultural lands. Elements 4, 5, and 6 are pretty straightforward. What's the costs and the amount of technical and financial assistance, and what authorities will be used to implement the plan? Element 5, this is probably the most critical one of all of them. If no one knows what the plan is or understands what it's about, no one's going to know what it is or how to implement it or want to participate in implementing the plan. Element 6 is a plan schedule. Typically, most 9 plans that are being developed in Wisconsin have a 10-year time frame, but they can be shorter or longer than 10 years, depending on what time frame is selected. 10 years is a kind of a middle ground of many 9 plans that have been developed in our state. These are the last 3 elements, and this is basically trying to track implementation. One way you can do that in a 9 plan is to set interim measurable milestones. So by year 3, do you want to achieve so many acres of nutrient management plans within that watershed, or so many acres of cover crops, for example? Those are some measurable milestones. Element 8 gets into what interim criteria you're going to use to determine if load reductions are or are not being achieved over time and substantial progress is being made. So that gets into We know what our end goal is for meeting a concentration of phosphorus in a river or a lake. And we know through monitoring where we're at now in terms of phosphorus concentration. What criteria do we want to set that will be in between those two numbers? And can that be used to measure progress over time? Last item, element 9. This is watershed planning is based on estimations of practices and how much, and using models to estimate how much reductions will be achieved. Element 9 is kind of the confirmation. It requires that water quality monitoring be done in that same watershed at specific time periods to evaluate how well all those estimations or planning and implementation of the plan is working or not working. And essentially, at DNR, we are actively wanting to focus some of our biologists' workloads within 9-element plan watersheds. They want to do monitoring in watersheds that have achieved significant implementation of practices to see if there's a measurable change in that river, lake, or stream. So those are the 9 elements. I just have a few more slides here, and then I'm going to be leaving up for you guys to ask questions. But this is the big one I wanted to answer for you today. Why are these so important? I'll come back to TMDLs. TMDLs only say you need so much reduction of phosphorus or sediment for that river, stream, or lake to meet standards. But it doesn't say how you get there, who can do it, how much this is going to cost, where are the most critical areas that could achieve that faster. 9-element plans answer all those questions. TMDLs do not. So we're trying to use 9-element plans as the main implementation strategy for meeting TMDL reduction goals. And as you can see, I'm going to toggle back and forth here. You can see we have some very large 9-element plans in the northwest corner that pretty much reflect the TMDL areas in the northwest corner of our state. And we are trying to increase the amount of 9-element plan areas in the remaining TMDL areas of our state. We've had significant success in the lower Fox Basin with 9-element planning. And this red area, as you see here, is a plan under development that will encapsulate the upper Fox and Wolf River Basin. There are some other 9-element plans that are under development or have recently been approved, and that's these gray areas. This is in the Milwaukee River Basin. This one was just approved last week. That's the Cedar Creek, Pigeon, Yaleo, Mole watershed-based plan. And this one up here is a joint plan between Kewaunee and Door County, and that's the Anape River watershed-based plan. My goal as the watershed program planning coordinator is to promote the development and implementation of these plans to implement TMDLs. Just a couple more, I think I have only 2 more slides here. So if you want an idea of how many plans do we have, the blue bars have a white number here, and this is over time from 2013 up to 2019. We've hovered right around 30 or so plans. The numbers have gone down and back up over time a little bit, but the number is pretty much the same. And we are, like I said earlier, 9-element plans have a lifespan, typically of about 10 years. So after 10 years, they expire and then they drop off, and new plans can replace them, or a plan that goes out of date can be renewed with new information, with new goals and objectives and milestones, and it can be approved again as a continued 9-element plan. For those of you that are county land conservation employees, I talked about this a little bit yesterday, counties are required to have a land water resource management plan. And what we did at DNR is when you look closely at what the requirements are for ACCAP 50 for land water plans, which you see right here on the screen, and you compare this to the elements, element 1, 2, and 3 that I just described with, and so forth, that I just went through with you, they're very similar, or they're in alignment, excuse me, with one another. And I won't read through all these, but this is a fact sheet that is on our 9-element plan webpage if you'd like to compare. So the main point I want to make here is that they're very similar content requirements. And for counties, you could say within this watershed, not our entire county, but this watershed, our land water plan addresses many of the 9 elements. And that is definitely possible, and some counties have done exactly that by referencing their land water plan within a 9-element watershed-based plan. That's just the bottom of it there, same fact sheet. Okay, if you want to know more about 9-element plans, we have a webpage that's devoted exclusively to this topic, and it covers some of the things I just went through with you today. This is how you get there. Or if you just go to the start screen for DNR's homepage, there's a search box, just type in the number 9 and the word key. It'll take you right to this webpage. On this web page, there's an interactive map that I'm showing and circling here. If you click on this, the most current 9-element plan areas that have been approved by us and EPA are shown within Wisconsin. The map does not show planning areas that are under development because of the fluid nature of which they're developed. We're not trying to show those, but if you want to know, you can contact me, and I have some other maps that I keep myself for that to answer those questions. So I've kind of covered the Clean Water Act, TMDLs, impaired waters, and how we're trying to use 9-element watershed-based plans to implement TMDLs and restore impaired waters. I'll take any questions if people have questions.
Great. Good job getting those all covered, Andrew. So, and one county had asked about a model or example of a model 9-key element plan, and Courtney put the link into the chat box. So that is there if somebody wants that, or you can certainly contact Andrew. Mary Hayes asked, how does an entity with a point source permit like a city factor into this?
Okay. Yeah, great question, Mary. So within a watershed-based plan, the focus is primarily on non-point sources, but there should be a chapter or some inventory of which point sources and permitted operations like a city or an industrial discharger are within the watershed. Those can be shown on a map or a map in a table. And simply in many watershed-based plans, that's enough information to explain where they exist, who they are. And usually there's a paragraph or two that explains that under the Clean Water Act, like I just explained, they have a permit. And under a TMDL, as those permits are reissued every 5 years, the discharge limits for those point sources are reduced to meet or make progress towards meeting the TMDL reduction goals.
Okay, great. Since we're kind of out of time, I guess what we'll do is if people have questions for Andrew, just to reach out to him. He'll be able to answer all your questions, I'm sure. So great job, Andrew. Thanks. You don't have to come back tomorrow. So you are done, and I'm going to get Brian Lefferholtz loaded up and have him. So thanks. Have a good rest of your day. If you want to stay and learn about CREP, you can stay on for a little bit longer.
I may stay on, Penny, but thanks everybody for listening and wanting to learn more about what we're doing at DNR for restoring impaired waters. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Hi, Brian. Are you out there? I sent you the controls.
Sure. Well, thanks everybody for joining me today. Kind of fitting that it's beginning to downpour here in Dane County that we start talking about CREP a little bit this afternoon. So the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program is referred to as CREP. It's a resource for those who are actively working the land to use to help meet their conservation goals. It's particularly meant for those who are working or tilling or grazing the land along rivers, streams, wetlands, and lakes in Wisconsin. CREP is an offshoot of the USDA Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, that is enhanced by collaboration and incentives from our local partners, such as you. We are the E in CREP. Wisconsin is a joint effort between federal, state, and county governments, and it's been designed to complement working agriculture while providing protection for Wisconsin soils and water resources. In my slideshow, you'll see some pictures that I've taken along the way from being out in the field. Various counties in Wisconsin, you'll kind of see what CREP looks like on the ground. So if you see up in the upper corner of each picture, I try to put the county name in each one. Some of you might recognize those sites. CREP is authorized under the Farm Bill. So every 4 years, we look for new authorization for CREP along with CRP under the Farm Bill. In Wisconsin, we formed our federal-state agreement in 2001. That agreement with FSA Washington says that we can enroll up to 100,000 acres into the program, that the state and counties together are required to match federal payments by 20%. The state itself has authorized $28 million in bond authority for our portion of incentive payments and cost share payments that go directly to landowners. And CREP is considered a continuous sign-up type of CRP, which means we don't have an enrollment window. We just need authority to do a sign up in order to start enrollment. Currently, we work with 53 different counties in the state. Each of those counties holds an agreement with DATCP that lays out what the county's role is and the state role is. CREP in Wisconsin, under that state federal agreement, has 4 different project areas. The riparian project area, which is kind of this orange-yellow area on the map. The southern grassland area, which is down in the southwest part of the state, Iowa, Lafayette, Greene, and Dane counties. The northern grassland area, which is the central part of the state, as well as the Lake Superior project area, covering the Douglas Bayfield, Ashland, and Iron County areas. One thing to note is that CREP is a water quality program. The point is to help improve water quality in the state. When CREP was originally designed, it was designed around where the 303D impaired waters were located in 2001. Of course, since that time, we have unfortunately expanded that list as far as what are impaired waters. So other areas in the state that could possibly use CREP as a tool as well that may not currently be eligible in a project area. So what is CREP? The goal of Wisconsin CREP is to reduce agricultural runoff along streams and wetlands by installing buffers and creating wildlife habitat along waterways surrounded by agricultural use. CREP offers landowners an opportunity to voluntarily stop farming land abutting streams, wetlands, and other water bodies and place those into various conservation practices. What is key here is that this is voluntary. Everybody who signs up does it voluntarily. In return for signing up, landowners receive incentive payments, annual rental payments, and cost share payments, along with other assistance such as technical assistance from our partners such as NRCS and the LCDs. And I find that the landowners tend to value that assistance along with obviously the incentive payments. CREP is flexible in design, and I'll show you some maps later about kind of showing how CREP is laid out in the landscape. But it's flexible in design. It does allow landowners various options to choose from and different conservation practices to choose from. In Wisconsin, we offer 2 different contract options, the 15-year agreement or the perpetual easement. I say in Wisconsin because there are 30 different states that participate in the CREP program, and we are just one of those 30 other counties, and we offer 15-year agreements and perpetual easements. Other states offer only agreements or only perpetual easements or even longer agreement terms. But in Wisconsin, we're authorized for 15-year agreements and perpetual easements. So if I was standing out in the field, how would I know if the piece of land is eligible for CREP? Well, here's the 4 general rules I tell folks to look at. Just think about while they're out in the field. 1, are you within a CREP project area? That's a fairly easy one. 2, are you standing on a piece of land that has been cropland 4 out of 6 years between 2012 and 2017, or is currently marginal pasture land? That 6 years window for cropland that's looked at is always the 6 years prior to the most recent farm bill. Also, is the land within 150 feet of an eligible stream or water body? And can we enroll a minimum of 20 feet? Our minimum practice width is 20 feet. As I said earlier, we do have 4 different project areas. The practices are fairly similar between the project areas, with a couple major differences with the grassland areas. The grassland areas add a couple more practices on top of the riparian project practices that allow them to go up to 1,000 feet out from an eligible water body, not just 150 feet from a water body, which is what is allowed within the riparian project area. But those lands that are enrolled in the grassland area, in the southern grassland area, also have to be considered highly erodible land. So again, if you're on a piece of land, you're thinking, well, maybe this land might be eligible for CREP. 4 things you can think, 4 things to just run through in your mind is that project area? Is it within a project area? Is it cropland 4 out of 6 years, or marginal pasture land? Is it within 150 feet of an eligible stream or water body? And can we enroll at least 20 feet? Those 4 things, if they meet those, should have give the landowner information about CREP, and if they're interested, have them contact FSA or FSA so they can get the ball rolling. Of course, CREP is required to be adjacent to an eligible water body. So the next question people ask is, well, what is an eligible water body? Eligible water bodies include perennial streams, creeks and ditches, seasonal streams, creeks and ditches, lakes and ponds, most wetlands, as well as sinkholes. So we can install conservation practices around any of those eligible water bodies. What is not considered an eligible water body are gullies, where water only runs after rainfall or snowmelt. CREP offers about 10 different conservation practices for landowners to choose from. These include some of our most popular ones, which are the CP21 grass filter strip, the CP22 forest riparian buffer, that's trees and shrubs, as well as the wetland CP23 and 23A, the wetland restorations. Those are our main riparian practices that we install. Within the grassland project areas, our additional practices, including the permanent native grasses, the CP1, the permanent introduced grasses and legumes, as well as the CP25, the tall grass, prairie, and oak savanna. And here are some pictures of what they all look like off to the side. I mentioned earlier that CREP is fairly flexible. And it has the flexibility to fit the farm. CREP does not have a minimum acreage. It only has a minimum width that it has to meet. Our minimum width is, on our smallest practices, is 20 feet. That's a grass filter strip. Unless 20 feet doesn't meet the resource concern, if 40 feet is needed to meet the resource concern, or up to 150 feet is needed to meet the resource concern, they will be required to put in that distance. But let's say 40 feet are needed to meet the resolve the resource concern, the landowners can choose to enroll additional acreage up to 150 feet out from that eligible water body. We do have practices as small as 2/10 of an acre and up to 100 acres. So again, no minimum acreage, just minimum practice size. And we want to be able to resolve that resource concern. Like you see in this picture in Greene County, this map kind of showing how the CREP sites have been laid out in the landscape. Landowners can mix and max practices on the same farm. Up here, area A is a grass filter strip running along between this crop field and the waterway. And down here, we've got trees planted on what looks like it was probably marginal pasture land down in this CREP area. So again, landowners can put what's needed on the farm to help meet their resource concerns specifically for those sites. We also have a nice rule within CREP that if we do end up taking 60% of a field, we can take the remainder of the field. That's so we don't leave small slivers of unworkable land that the producer can't do anything with. So again, CREP does have the flexibility in both how it can be laid out in the landscape as well as the practice that can be chosen for the landowner. This quick slide just shows where our practices tend to be located. This pie chart represents all the acres that are currently enrolled in CREP and their soils farmland class. Over half of our land that's enrolled in the program is either considered not prime farmland or prime farmland if it's somehow protected from flooding or is drained. In fact, the additional land that is enrolled that is prime farmland or prime farmland of statewide importance is often enrolled because the landowner chooses to enroll that beyond what's needed to resolve the resource concern. So again, they voluntarily choose to add much of that prime farmland. Most of our sites are located in areas that are marginal agricultural land, tend to have lower soil productivity, and are often frequently flooded or damaged from flooding. So that's kind of where our sites end up being on the landscape. The Wisconsin CREP does, like I said, have two different contract options. We have the 15-year agreement. That does go for 15 years. The state pays an incentive rate of the soil rental rate times 1.5 times the acres. That can be bought out at any point in time from the landowner if they choose they don't want to be in it anymore. That is the way at which a 15-year agreement can be canceled, is a buyout on the state side. It does have an option to be converted later to an easement if the landowner chooses to do so, and it would be eligible for re-enrollment. For the perpetual easement, those do go for perpetuity. Our incentive rate is quite a bit higher from the state in that it's 12 times the soil rental rate times the acres. But those are not eligible for CRP1 re-enrollment after 15 years, and there's not a buyout option for those. Of course, with each of the state 15-year agreement, there's also they're both paired with a CRP1. So there's always a federal CRP1 plus either a 15-year agreement or a perpetual conservation easement. One thing to note with all our contracts is that there's no public access required as part of our agreements for CREP. Financial incentives and payments, really 4 different financial incentives that landowners receive. They receive annual payments from FSA. These are rental payments that go for up to 15 years. Those payments are based on the soil type, the county it's in, and if it was cropland or pasture land. Those payment rates range between $40 and $240 per acre based on that soil rental rate. We average about $130 per acre currently across the state for CREP. They receive upfront payments from both FSA as well as DATCP, and those are the state incentive payments I referred to earlier. Those incentive payments are provided soon after they sign the agreements. And we also provide practice incentive payments or cost share payments. FSA will put 50% of the cost sharing, as well as the state providing 20% cost share for practices installed. And for 3 practices, the CP21, the filter strip, the CP22, the forest riparian buffer, and the CP8As, the grass waterways, FSA will kick in an additional practice incentive payment of 40% on top of that. So for some of our practices, we pay up to 110% of the cost of installation, but for all the practices, we currently pay up to 70% cost sharing. One thing to note in Wisconsin, that any land that's enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program does remain eligible for use value assessment for property tax purposes. Just quickly on incentive payment, quickly on how we fall in relation to if it would remain under production. If you look at the chart, if you look at this chart right here, you can see that on average, and this is a little old graph, but on average, we pay about $200 per acre for our agreements currently. You can see that over time, our rates have gone up and kind of come back down as rental rates, as cash rent rates have gone up and down over time. CREP is implemented at the local level. It's implemented by the counties. It is usually successful if the counties put forth organized efforts to talk to landowners about the program. Efforts that are strategic and coordinated tend to do the best. We do need farmer buy-in, and once we get farmer buy-in, the program tends to spread fairly well through word of mouth. What's really important is the local partner relationships between NRCS, FSA, and the LCD offices. When those local partner relationships are working well, we tend to see CREP work well at the local offices. As I said earlier, each county has a state-county CREP contract that identifies the responsibilities for each of the counties and the state, as well as how much bond authority they're allotted for that county. In that state-county agreement, the general responsibilities of the county that are laid out are: first, promotion. That is the biggest responsibility and the biggest thing that LCDs can do and county offices can do for CREP is to get out there, know those 4 key things. Am I in a project area? Am I next to an eligible water body? Am I on a piece of land that meets the CREP eligibility? And can I install at least 20 feet of practice on that site? And getting a landowner to the FSA office to get the ball rolling on a CRP2C to get the sign up going. That is the biggest role that the counties can play in CREP. Counties also work with NRCS and FSA on site determination as needed. They're asked to assist the landowner with the state application for the 15-year agreement. That's the LWR 283. And for the easement application, that's the LWR 209. To distribute the state cost share and incentive payments, to monitor the CREP sites for compliance as needed, and to administer CREP for the duration of the contract, including transfers, buyouts, compliance issues, answer landowner questions, and so on. The county staff are really the landowner's first point of contact for the state side of CREP. As I said earlier, if the partnership works well, CREP tends to work well. This flowchart shows the process of establishing one CREP agreement from start to finish. Each color in that flowchart represents a different agency that's involved and the step they're involved with along the way. It might look perplexing and it might look as though it's unachievable, but we have over 4,000 agreements in place, so it has worked over time. It's just a matter of getting used to where you fall within the chain, I guess, of enrollment. This is the CREP 15-year agreement. This is on the CREP 4 counties website that the state keeps up. All our forms are up on that CREP 4 counties website. Each of our agreement forms also has a paired instruction form with it that is available for you to help answer your questions as you help the landowners complete the agreements and the forms for the program. Looking at the program statewide and our current participation, we currently have about 3,000 agreements enrolled in the program, active, and about 510 easements, and we're working with over 5,000 landowners. We have about 40,000 acres enrolled in the program. Those sites average about 10 acres per site. So we don't do large tracts of land when we enroll. We do a lot of small contracts. Financially, we have spent about $19 million of that $28 million in bond authority so far. The counties have reported that they've contributed $3.6 million in in-kind costs, and those two combined, the state and county contribution payments. There are 30 different CREP states working on CREP. Currently, Wisconsin ranks 5th in the total number of contracts and 10th in the total number of acres. What that means is Wisconsin does a lot of small contracts for CREP compared to some of the other counties that are out there, or the other states that participate in CREP. Of course, in return for the taxpayer dollars that are provided to landowners for incentive and cost share payments, we do get some environmental returns for those, including nutrient reduction in nutrient runoff and sediment trapping, stream bank protection, erosion control, and overall improved water quality. The estimates we get, we've estimated through CREP, our environmental benefits analysis, that we are currently buffering about 900 miles of shoreline. We've installed 11,000 acres of grassland. And in our practices, annually, we reduce phosphorus runoff by about 95,000 pounds per year. 50,000 pounds of nitrogen annually, and 46,000 tons of sediment are reduced from going into the waters of the state of Wisconsin every year through the conservation practices we've installed through CREP. As I said earlier, DATCP keeps a webpage available, first for landowners to go to if they have questions about CREP, but also to host all of the forms and different tools we have available for the Land Conservations Department. If you were to Google just WI space CREP, the first return you get is the Wisconsin CREP DATCP website. On the website for counties are included the process flowcharts that I showed before, payment calculator that's available for you to estimate payment calculations for landowners, all the forms that are needed for the landowners for you to work with for enrollment, all the updated brochures, project area maps, and so on. And I want to thank everybody who was able to stick through the whole slideshow and open it up for questions.
Thanks, Brian. So again, we are taking questions through the chat line or by unmuting yourself. We're happy people joined us again. Tomorrow we start up at 1, and I think that's about it. So Brian, you got any final words for anyone?
I don't. I had our contact information up online. I'm sorry I lost it, but if anybody has any questions, our contact information is on the CREP website. So feel free to give us a call at any point in time. Either myself, Melissa Gilmore, or Susan Mockert are available.
Right. And we have that on our website too, the online resources for this training that we had all the presenters' information in there as well. So looks like everyone's leaving. So we may as well go too, Brian. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Okay,
You too. Bye
thanks
now.
much.